Hey everybody, welcome back to the book log. Today I am joining the echelons of high school students across time and space by essentially writing a book report on Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. I too read this book in high school, but reading it again as an adult, I realized there are a lot of things that I either didn't pick up on or didn't appreciate back then. For how short of a book this is, it really is packed with a lot of depth and nuance and vision. The first thing I noticed, though, reading through it again, is like how beautiful the prose is. That probably sounds like a kind of inanely obvious comment to people who are familiar with John Steinbeck, but I really was struck by like the beauty of the writing throughout this whole story. It's not necessarily super lyrical or flowery, but it's just so vividly descriptive, and it's able to like perfectly capture the essence of 1930s America, the way it looks, the way it feels, or at least like my conception of those things. It's a very visual, almost cinematic book. Something I thought was particularly unique was how often Steinbeck will center the setting as the focal point of a scene as opposed to any character. He'll describe events from the perspective of the room itself, if that makes sense. For example, he'll describe a room that's just silent and empty. Nothing of note is happening in there besides like dust floating in a ray of sunlight shining through the window. But suddenly the characters will enter the room, have some conversation, then leave, only for the room to be described once more in the state it's in after everyone left. It's pretty fascinating. I don't know if I'm describing it in a way that makes sense, but it's like watching the events from a camera that's fixed in one spot. The story's plot is pretty simple, but it carries a lot of thematic and metaphorical weight. Maybe that's why it's so widely used in high school curriculum. It's just easy to follow. It wears its heart and its meaning on its sleeves, bleak as it may be. It's about two men, George and Lenny, who are wandering through California looking for work. George is described as slender, smart, and pragmatic, while Lenny is just this tower of a man who is very physically strong but mentally slow. Their friendship is sort of the focal point of the story, and it's rendered so realistically and so beautifully throughout. Lenny often gets on George's nerves, and George occasionally feels burdened by him, but they have each other, and that's what matters in a world that's filled with loneliness and isolation. Eventually, they come to a ranch where they secure work, shucking barley, tending to the land, doing other manual farm labor type things. There, they meet a whole cast of colorful characters. My favorites are probably Slim, the lead mule driver, who feels like an archetype straight out of a classic Western, and Crooks, the stable hand who is ostracized because of his race and through whom the book explores themes of racism and segregation. There's also Curly, the boss's dickhead son, who is a great antagonist in the story. George and Lenny have this notion that someday they'll escape this cycle of wandering from place to place, working various odd jobs. They'll get their own piece of land, grow their own crops, tend to their own animals independently without being beholden to anyone else. This vision or fantasy gives them hope, gives them a sense of purpose in the face of their difficult, transient lifestyle, and it's a motif that's referred to constantly throughout the story. For George, the dream is bittersweet. He clings to it as a way to keep them both motivated, but deep down, he doesn't necessarily believe it will ever come true. Lenny, on the other hand, fully believes in this idyllic future. To him, it's not a dream, it's a promise. It's a tangible reality that is waiting for them somewhere in the future. He frequently asks George to repeat the vision out loud, especially the part about tending a litter of rabbits, because Lenny loves to touch and pet soft things. To me, this story's commentary on hope is its main purpose. From a book report angle, you could probably mention how this is related to like 20th century American idealism about freedom and landowning and westward expansion, manifest destiny, etc. But I think it also runs a lot deeper than that. It's about how hope functions as a fundamental part of the human condition. Hope in this story is like this ephemeral force that has the power to push people forward even when it's not strictly real or achievable. For George and Lenny, the dream of owning their own piece of land and living off it may be unrealistic, but it gives their lives structure and meaning and something to move towards. And it's a powerful and addictive feeling. Even other characters on the ranch, like Crooks and the old rancher Candy, immediately want to buy into this fantasy as soon as they hear about it. And that's why the famous ending, and really the book as a whole, is so tragic. Everybody already knows all this, but to lay it out anyway, a series of events spirals out of control. Lenny accidentally kills Curly's wife, and this sets off a manhunt for his life. George, who recognizes that Lenny's fate is basically sealed and that the mob will not show him any mercy, makes the incredibly sad decision to take matters into his own hands. He finds Lenny by the river, which is their agreed-upon meeting spot in case of trouble, distracts him by recounting their dream one last time, and then, as Lenny listens, George shoots him in the head to spare him from the impending violence and cruelty of the mob. This ending is notoriously devastating, and I think it's so effective because it's simultaneously a loss of Lenny's life, who is such an innocent and lovable character, but it's also the death of their hope. The dream that kept them going, fragile as it was, dies with Lenny and leaves George alone in a world that feels cruel and empty. The entire story is kind of a dark parable about how hope can sustain you, but also how hope is dangerous and painful and fleeting. Again, it's a very bleak story. It's about the harsh realities of life crushing your stupid little dreams. But in spite of that, it still manages to be a very beautiful and moving story. There's a sort of dignity in the characters' struggles and relationships they form, particularly George and Lenny's friendship. It just adds such a layer of humanity and warmth to an otherwise very grim narrative. Steinbeck doesn't just bombard you with despair, he also highlights these moments of connection and resilience that make the fleeting, transient nature of hope all the more effective and poignant. The world is unforgiving and the human spirit is fragile, but you have to do it anyway, so you might as well hope about something, even if it's imaginary. Does it make sense to force every 15-year-old in America to dwell on these things? I don't know. But it gives you something to think about as an adult too. Easy 10 out of 10.